Welcome back. The Hong Kong Literary Festival is underway up until the 18th of March. Today, one of its events featured locally based author Frank Dicotta talking about his book, Mao's Great Famine, which is based partly on access to previously restricted documents. It's harrowing reading. Frank Dicotta is with us in the studio now. Frank Dicotta, let's first of all look at the statistics you've unearthed of how many people perished during the Great Famine.
Most of the estimates so far have been based on officially published population statistics, and on that basis a number of historians have estimated the number of unnecessary deaths to amount to 30 million. But what I managed to do is to read massive amounts of unpublished statistics that were collected at the time by public security bureaus, by the party itself that sent in investigation teams into the countryside at the very end of the famine. And on the basis of a massive amount of these unpublished reports, I come up with at least 45 million people who vanished during those 3 to 4 years.
That's an extraordinary figure.
Indeed.
I mean, one of the things that struck me in reading the book was I always assumed that most of these deaths, if not all of them, were kind of accidental consequences, but it appears that just isn't the case.
That's very much what I thought too, but on the very first day that I hit the archives, some 5 years ago when I started this project, I came across a report that talked about horrendous violence in Guangdong province, just next door. A 12-year-old boy, for speaking out during a meeting, put into a hog's cage. A man who was tied up and chucked into a pond for stealing a potato. People were tortured, some of them were buried alive, had their ears chopped off, had stones dumped onto them. In Sichuan, a few people were doused in petrol and set alight. Extraordinary levels of violence as farmers and cadres get locked in a very brutalized sort of a cycle of violence in which the cadres have to whip up this workforce in one drive after the other. But the farmers, of course, have lost every single incentive to perform any work. The land is not theirs, the utensils have been taken away, there's no need for them, no incentive to go and perform the work. So they get locked in this extraordinary violence, which by a very rough estimate would amount to 2 to 3 million people having died violently during that period. That amounts to, if you take Pol Pot, we know what happened with Pol Pot in Cambodia. If you multiply Pol Pot by a factor of 20, you get roughly near what happened in China from 1958 to 1962.
And what is also remarkable, again this comes out from your book, is the very minimal level of resistance. I mean, here's people being brutalized, their food is being stolen, they're being killed. You would have thought there would have been more resistance.
Yes. When farmers realize that they're not going to get any help, of course it's too late for them. They're often too starved already, they can barely crawl down the road to the next village. But there are cases of uprisings. There are about 12 in the southern provinces in 1960. But of course these uprisings don't go very well. There's nothing left. There's no civil society. There is no religion. There's nothing outside the organization of the party itself. There's no organization outside of the organization. And something else happens too. Villagers, however much brutalized they are, tend to think that the cadres locally are bad, but if Mao Zedong knew, if the government knew, then things would be very different.
And you mention all these petitions to Mao, don't you?
People have write petitions. There's one girl who's found by an investigation team who has carried a letter stitched inside her coat for a whole year in the hope that she might be able to hand it over to an outsider.
What's the legacy of this?
It's a massive black hole from 58 to 62 with huge destruction of human beings, but also nature being savaged during those years, with the forage coverage being lost at about 50%, with housing, the housing stock being destroyed in the case of Hunan province alone. 40% of it vanished, reduced to rubble, used as fertilizer. How do you climb out of that black hole? I think the difficulty has been not only to get back to some sort of track towards economic development, but to never look back and face the past, to keep on running.
Well, Frank Dicotta, thank you very much indeed.